a lot of chemicals. I did a lot of spraying, and it was only in the later years that we started using coveralls and a mask to protect it a little bit. Anyway, I stopped using DDT, I think a year before some other growers did, but anyway, I did a lot of spraying, a lot of it, for years on end.
There weren't the controls at that time, and there were a lot of products such as DDT that were used at that back in the 60s and that has probably became much more aware of what they were, and the government itself became much more aware and put bans on these things. Then farmers tried to find other ways of controlling them. The chemicals were cheap, for one thing, and they were very broad range. You just kind of sprayed, and anything that was out there happened to get killed, no matter whether it was beneficial to your crop or whatever happened to be in the way, it was taken care of. And the half-life of a lot of these products ended up being significant, the length of time that they remained in the environment. And so there was a tremendous increase in knowledge in the 60s and 70s period about the effects that these chemicals were having.
The pesticides were reliefs. We didn't have the Pesticides Act back then that mandated any type of education. Anybody could literally go to the co-op and buy quantities, 50-gallon drums of this, and they were marketing it as such.
When I had finished, we were using masks, but for years we didn't use a mask at all.
You used to go out after supper, and we never closed the windows or anything. We could smell all that. That was.
Yeah.
And you just had on your farm clothes. You didn't put on. Yeah. But we didn't realize that.
Yeah. 55 years ago. And you would remember that in the tobacco fields, the guys with their dusters, arsenic of lead, and you go down there and no dust be going around. You do it in the morning when the dew would stick to it. You'd be walking right into it.
I was wet rigged with my coveralls, no mask, and I used 2,4-D ester. And I was dumb to the fact, never, no mask or nothing.
He had a power sprayer, so an electric one, and just stand there and just fog that barn. You couldn't see him there. Just like that in one spot, he could fog her all. He didn't have to go to each cow. Just what a beautiful setup he had. All envied him.
He was living in the lap of luxury, eh?
Yeah. And that man grew a lump on his neck that big before he died. And I don't know what it was, but I presume it was a cancer. That big, just like that. Couldn't put his hat down.
In the early days of agricultural chemical use, children were often exposed as well, either through their own responsibilities on the farm or simply from being in areas where various chemicals were being mixed or applied.
When I was 5 years old, 6 years old, I watered because they picked up potatoes by hand then, right?
Right.
I went in my little wagon and took the water pails out, so and I did that all every day. Every day they were out there, I watered them out at the field. I made sure I had fresh water when they got back to the other end of the field. That's what I did.
Farm girls started working a lot younger on doing jobs than the city girls did, and maybe some weren't the cleanest jobs in the world. And dust exposure too. Like, we used to live in dust that I couldn't even tolerate now if I tried. Dust and ammonia, and like I was cleaning cow stables when I was 4, because I started school when I was 5 and I was helping Dad before then. Just lived in the cow stables, and you walk in, anybody walked in them that wasn't used to them, and they're so full of ammonia that stripping tobacco. You walk in a tobacco stripping shanty after they've been stripping tobacco in there for a few days, and you can hardly breathe, can you?
No, you never think about those things as you're a kid. You just go about what you're there to do.
Yeah, I remember as a little kid, not as a little kid, probably as a 10-year-old is where I start remembering. It's 9 or 10. I remember us being in the field and Dad spraying while we're hoeing the cucumbers, and he's spraying in the field right beside us.
You certainly got it on your skin, and you washed when you come in for a meal. That was a given in our home, but of course you'd be out on the farm, you'd eat an apple or pear off the tree, so we had fruit trees, and there wouldn't necessarily be hand washing going on. And when you have feed bins and grain sitting around that's going to be used for your livestock to feed them, you have a lot of rats. So of course you have all kinds of rat kill out there, And children, you know, small children are told, you know, you stay away from that. But, you know, you still pick it up, you handle it, you refill it, you know, and oh yeah, go wash your hands. But I don't know how readily that's done in a lot of, because I'd been at other homes, and my goodness, there was, you know, flies would be a real problem in the milk farms.
My job most evenings was to, when Dad would bring the cows in to milk them, they would just be covered with flies. So we had the pump can, and you just
Just to keep the flies off the tails?
Off the tails and off the back. They were all settled right on the back of the cows. And so, you know, here you as a little 7-year-old, you're walking around, and the air would just be like a fog after you finished. And
Was that DDT?
that was DDT.
You know, we always sprayed the cows in the summertime before, because otherwise they'd kill you with their tail if you sat there and milked.
Yeah, well, that's right.
If you milked by hand, which I did.
And they'd spray chemicals and that on there where you shouldn't be going back in there for 2 and 3 days back. As an agricultural worker, you weren't allowed back in the vineyards and that. And yet here they were spraying, these vineyards were right in, well, they weren't urban settings, but there were a serious number of farmhouses directly around these spraying sites. So they were spraying some heavy-duty chemicals.
Like you say, we'd be in the house at night when Uncle Ernie would go out to spray. We didn't shut any windows, and you knew exactly where he was and what was going on. Yeah, you'd smell it. And of course, that whole area, if it wasn't him that was spraying, it was somebody else. It was all just a cloud.
This is all corn, this is cucumbers, there's your cows, there's our house, and there's the little well. And he would spray all the way around there. And
This is your dad, right?
This is my dad, yeah.
No, this is the way it was, right?
Yeah, and he died of cancer at 56.
Dieldrin, for example, on tobacco, because that's one crop that I worked in personally quite a bit during my younger period, like from the age of, say, about 11, 12 years old up to about 18. We would be exposed to that type of material because we'd be working like in the fields, suckering tobacco, so you'd have your hands in that material.
2,4-D, which was first marketed in the mid-1940s, soon came into widespread use as a broadleaf herbicide. Although it has been used for decades, its potential health and environmental impacts are still being studied.
Yeah, we'd spray the corn with it, and spray around the ditches with it, around the farmyards, kill thistles, and kind of unsophisticated way then. Everything was open air and almost stir it with your arms.
And it was relatively inexpensive at that point,
real
right?
cheap, 50 cents an acre. Like we could afford it. We could grow clean crops. We could grow more because you had to hoe it before.
Now there's got to be 100 chemicals out there you can use, so you can sort of customize when you want to put it on and what weeds you're targeting.
Atrazine, which was introduced in the late 1950s, was used extensively to kill grassy weeds. Much less is used today. In fact, due to health and environmental concerns, atrazine has been banned in Europe.
It was seen as a godsend because it was a grass herbicide. So if you had a real grass problem, it would just knock it right out.
Yeah, and you could almost grow corn right in it. You could spray it, the ground actually turned to white behind you almost. That's how heavy you could put it on, and the corn would still grow.
Atrazine was used a lot in corn, and they didn't realize the buildup of it in the fields, and it wasn't that common to rotate your herbicides. And if atrazine was good this year, well then let's keep on and use it next year, and it became a real problem with buildup and well contamination.